This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. I used Squarespace to build both Basics with Babish and BingingWithBabish.com. On the sites, you'll find recipes, equipment lists, other news, and updates. All beautifully designed, if I do say so myself. Get 10% off your first Squarespace order by visiting squarespace.com/babish.
It's the Strip House chocolate cake.
We're gonna do a layer by layer to get our 24 layers chocolate cake. We put the first layer here, then we're gonna put chocolate custard.
It's like a crescendo of chocolate, and it happens over and over.
Another one. And this one, we have to put chocolate ganache on top.
Here you have 20-something layers of chocolate coming at you.
Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Anything with Alvin, where I attempt to make something from a food video that I've been watching in my spare time. Today, I'll be attempting the famous 24-layer chocolate cake from Strip House here in New York City, a well-established steakhouse in the city that has become very famous for this dessert specifically. This video is exciting to me for a couple of reasons. One, instead of a frosting, they seem to be making a chocolate pastry cream or custard, which I think would taste a lot better. And two, I'm curious to see how all those layers would taste after you do them a lot thinner than a normal cake. And three, well, this just sounds like fun. Fortunately for us, the recipe for this cake is actually quite available online, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start by creaming 7 sticks of butter with 4 pounds of sugar. Keep in mind that this is gonna be split into 2 batches because our stand mixer can't fit all of it at once. Now, the studio is quite cold today, so in order to make this butter cream properly, we're gonna warm the bowl with our hands, using the power of friendship and community to make this cake happen. And fun fact, it's actually working. It feels kind of like a butter spirit bomb of sorts. Then we're gonna beat in 14 eggs at room temperature, 1 egg at a time, so that it doesn't get all too chunky in there. Now we're gonna get our dry ingredients sorted. We're gonna combine 3/4 of a pound of cocoa powder, 2 1/8 pound of cake flour, 1/4 cup of salt, yes, trust me, 2 tablespoons of baking soda, 3/4 a teaspoon of baking powder, and just whisk that all together until all of our dry ingredients are mixed. Then we're gonna handle our liquid ingredients: 2 1/3 cups of coffee, 2 1/3 cups of milk, and 1/4 of a cup of vanilla extract. Somehow I can never make these things without spilling a little bit, so there's our spill for the day. Basically making a vanilla latte as liquids for this cake, which I think is pretty awesome. Then we're going to alternate adding our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients, roughly 1/3 at a time, just to make sure that everything kind of gets a chance to incorporate and nothing gets too either wet or too sticky. And we're going to go ahead and finish adding our dry and wet ingredients until our batter is looking pretty good. Now we're going to do this all over again to make a second batch of cake batter because they couldn't all fit in the same one. Then into 11-inch spring-form pans, which have been lined with a sheet of parchment on the bottom, we're going to evenly divide up our batter until that they're the same height across all 3 of them. Then these cakes go into the oven at 325 degrees for about 50 minutes to an hour. Now, I'm a big fan of cakes that don't actually use frosting. So for this cake, we're going to be making a chocolate custard. We're first going to crack and separate 3 whole eggs and 5 egg yolks into one bowl and whisk that together until homogeneous. Then we're going to bring 3 cups of whole milk and 6 cups of heavy cream to a scald. Once you see wisps of steam starting to emerge from the surface of the white liquid, we're going to slowly ladle 1 cup of this into the eggs and whisk continuously, sort of tempering the eggs until we add about 3 ladlefuls. Once the eggs have been tempered properly, we're going to add this mixture back into the pot and bring this back up to a slow simmer. Then we're going to add in a mix of 3/4 cups of flour and 2 cups of sugar, whisking the whole time. Then we're going to add in a mixture of 1 cup of cornstarch with 1 cup of cold milk, a sort of a cornstarch milk slurry, which is going to be one of our thickening agents, and whisk that in, stirring continuously as well. Once this has started to thicken, I'm going to take this off of the heat and add in 1 pound of bittersweet chocolate. This is Valrhona chocolate, probably my favorite brand because of its shape and its flavor and its quality. I'm using 60% cacao content chocolate here, pretty good balance. We're also going to whisk in 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract as well. Once this is all whisked in, it seems to me that this is still a little thick, so we're going to loosen this up by adding in 1 more cup of milk and 1 more cup of cream. After tasting it, I realized there should be a little bit more sugar, so we're going to go ahead and add 1/4 cup of sugar additional. Now this is looking pretty good, but there's probably a couple lumps from all that starch in there, so with Rachel's help, we're going to go ahead and strain this through a fine mesh sieve, whisking the whole time, making sure that our end result custard comes out silky and smooth. Now, as the person who is making the custard, it is your right and your right only to have the first taste of the whisk after it comes out. This little snack is completely entitled to you or whoever you would want to bestow this gift upon. Now that our custard is good, we're going to wrap that and set that in the fridge until we're ready to use it. Our cake slices have finished baking. This is what they look like, pretty nice and even and flat because we bake them at a low temperature. We're going to allow them to cool completely before we cut into it, which means resting them for a whole day for us. It is now day 2 of chocolate cake making. We're going to take these cakes and attempt to get get these into super thin layers. Now in the video, the chef handling the cake is clearly skilled and has done this many times. He's able to get the cake into almost half a centimeter thickness, which is really insane if you think about how hard it is to level the cake. At this point, Andrew also came downstairs to give us a great idea about how to level the cakes in this fashion. He said that if you started to level the cakes from the bottom instead of the top by stacking them on something and putting them on a sheet tray, you should be able to get the same thickness every time by using the edges of the sheet tray as a guide for your knife. Although this seems perfect in practice, this is actually a little bit harder than I thought because the cakes are cold from refrigerating it from the day before. Nevertheless, I will chug through all of these layers and attempt to get them as level as possible. And I will say, using that cake board technique to slide under the cake to lift off that thin layer is a great technique when making these. They must have some really skilled pastry chefs who make this cake every single day. They probably make this cake many times per day, so I can't even imagine and think about all the labor and the skill required to make this. Not all my layers are perfect either. I'm getting a lot of holes, a lot of unevenness, having to patch it up with this nice cake, which is actually nice because this cake is so dense and gooey that you can kind of use it as a glue patchwork situation for any holes that might arise. Out of the 3 cakes we baked, I was only actually able to get 10 layers of cake, not the 12 that we needed to make this 24-layer cake, so I asked Rachel to help me make 1 additional cake for layering off to the side. Thank you, Rachel. All the remaining scraps are gathered in a bowl for future use, which we're going to show very soon. And by very soon, I mean right now. So we're going to take all the trimmings that we got off of the layering process, and after snacking on quite a bit and exclaiming how super good it is, we're going to go ahead and crumble them evenly onto a sheet tray lined with parchment paper. Once these are small in size, we're going to put them into an oven at 350 degrees convection for about 30 minutes or so, tossing them every once in a while to make sure that they cook and dry out evenly. While our cake crumbs are getting crispy in the oven, we're going to go ahead and assemble the cake. Now in the video, they seem to assemble the cake in 2 different deep pans and then stack them together. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to line the side of each 11-inch springform pan with a strip of cake acetate, which is going to help the cake keep its shape and smooth texture on the outside. We're going to start each one with 1 layer of cake, followed by a healthy helping of the chocolate custard, spreading to make sure that it is even all the way through. We're going to try to be as even as possible with these, rotating it to make sure that it is as level and as smooth as possible. We repeat this process with as many cake layers as we have, filling up each spring form as high as we can go until we have no more cake and no more custard left over. Rachel's extra cake that she had baked had helped lend us another 4 layers, so we actually have a total of 14 cake layers and 14 layers of custard. So yeah, that's 28. But hey, here at the BCU, we strive for greatness, and overachieving is just the right amount. These cakes are going to go into the freezer for a quick chill while we work on our finished cake crumbs. These crumbs have been cooled for about 30 minutes or so until they've gone to room temperature. We're simply just going to blitz them in a food processor until fine. These are just really nice cake crunchies and surprisingly crispy. I have once again spilled all over the counter as usual. I'd like to say that those are just an excuse for me to have my snacks. Oh no. Once the cake crumbs have been pulverized into small bits, I'm going to put them in a bowl and set them aside for later use. Now Strip House also tops off their cake with a really beautiful layer of ganache as a finisher, so that's what we're gonna do. In a bowl we have 12 ounces of Arona chocolate, 85% this time because I like my ganache is quite bitter, and 1.5 cups of heavy cream which has been brought to a scald. We're gonna give this a little shake to get rid of any air bubbles and cover this with a cake board to let the chocolate slowly warm to temperature. I realized that the heat from the cream was not enough and the studio was kind of cold that day, so I'm gonna put the steel mixing bowl directly over a low flame and carefully stir it until it has come together and has become glossy and silky smooth. This ganache is going to get poured directly on top of one of our cake stacks, the one that's going to be the top layer, spread out and tilted until evenly spread across the top. Any leftover ganache is going to go straight to either your mouth or someone else that you really care about. I like to also give this a pretty hard tap on the table a couple times to release any air bubbles that have risen to the surface. Then we're going to return this cake and the other cake into the freezer overnight. It is now day 3 of making this chocolate cake. We're going to go ahead and take these frozen cakes out of the freezer. I'm going to use remaining chocolate custard as sort of a glue between the 2 stacks, spreading it out evenly to make sure that the cake stack that goes on top has something sticky to stick to. Now we're going to take off their springform harnesses and unwrap their acetate. After admiring how the acetate peels off so smoothly and all the layers we have, the cake with the ganache goes directly on top of the cake on the bottom, making sure that all sides are level and have easily aligned. Gonna hit the top with a little bit of a trim so that any edges of the ganache that stick out are trimmed off and go directly into my belly. On a cake stand, I'm going to work quickly to fill in the remaining holes with the chocolate custard that we have left. Once all the outsides have been covered, I'm going to take those cake crumbs that we made earlier and add a nice sort of coating to the edge of the cake. Some of the custard has started to freeze up, so I'm going to take a blowtorch and lightly heat it up until it has become a little bit more sticky so that the cake crumbs have somewhere to adhere to. After rotating and generously coating the edges of this cake, we're going to let this cake just sit out for about an hour or two just so that the inside can come up to room temperature. It is very cold right now, and I'm guessing it's going to be pretty difficult to cut. Once it feels a little bit better, we're going to go ahead and take a knife, dip it in some hot water to make sure that it is hot and lubricated, and attempt our first slice down these 24 layers of cake. The cake is still quite cold in the middle, which makes it extremely difficult to cut through. Here is Steve also attempting to cut through it. He is about twice as strong as I am, so the fact that he can't do it means, well, we gotta wait a little bit more. After reheating and making our way through our first slice of the cake, I thought to myself, hey, clearly the knife is getting really cold while we're cutting. How about we blowtorch it and get the metal screaming hot so that it can just sort of cut through the second slice like butter? And great idea. So here I am, blowtorching this knife until it is screaming hot, and yeah, it kind of sizzled while it cut through. I didn't really think about that part. Don't worry, it's not burnt, and still is very cold in the middle, which made it a lot more difficult to cut through. After we have made 2 cuts, it is now time for the big reveal. Here we go slowly. I like how this looks. I like it very much. Now that is a slice of chocolate cake. Let's go ahead and cut another slice. For whatever reason, when you cut the second slice, it's a lot easier than cutting the first one. Wonder why? We're gonna take a second to admire the cross section and the layers of this cake. Even though I don't really work with cakes in this capacity, I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. The tray technique with the leveling really made a huge difference in the way that we made our layers. But there it is. I present to you our version of the famous 24-layer chocolate cake from Strip House, this time with 4 extra layers with a total of 28. A towering slice of chocolate decadence that you would be pleased to receive at any meal, any time, any day of the year. And the big question is, well, how does it taste? Here we go. Let's go for a nice fork shot that goes all the way through each and every 28 layers. Oh, I like this cake. The texture is quite wonderful. A lot of the chocolate custard absorbed into the really nice dense cake itself, so it's more of like a sticky chocolate gooey pudding. The salt that we added definitely makes this taste extra awesome. Here's a nice little cross section of all the layers cut from the top, and yeah, we all took a huge slice home that day, which means we're going to be eating this through the new year. Maybe we should go for 100 layers next time. I mentioned before that this cake comes from a restaurant in the city called Strip House, and well, Andrew, Steve, and I all decided to go take a trip and see the cake for itself. So we went in, got some steak, and ultimately ordered the 24-layer chocolate cake, which our server made sure to mention it was 24 layers of indulgence. And when it came out, it looked very similar to the one that we had made, which was a really promising sign. The color was slightly different, a little bit darker, and the server mentioned that they did make them off-site in bulk because they do tend to also ship them in whole in case you wanted an entire cake for yourself, which seems pretty cool. And we were super excited and curious on how it stacked up compared to the version that we made, as this is the OG. The cake had a lot lighter crumb than ours. Ours was a little bit more dense and gooey, where I think theirs was a little bit more airy and crumbly. The crumbs on the side were also not as crunchy as the ones that we had done, but that's probably because they make so many of these cakes that they need to be held in refrigerators. I personally preferred the one that we made because it was a lot more gooey and moist in texture, and I tend to like chocolate cakes that are more on that side rather than on the lighter and crumbly side. Nevertheless, it was still good chocolate cake, although I do look forward to eating the one that I have at home that we made.
Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. They've been a great partner in supporting the Babish culinary universe and bringing my websites to life. From websites to online stores to domains and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for you to build your online presence. They also have SEO tools so that your site is getting found and searched by more people more often. If you want to try it for yourself, you can start your free trial today by visiting squarespace.com/babish to get 10% off your first purchase.